Ranunculaceae, the Buttercup family. Great family to start with, looking at some eudicots, because these are the flowers that are kind of the most like the ancestral flowers. They're sort of primitive. Many of them at least, conform to all 5 aspects of the free eagle numerous spiral hypogynous finch flower types that we looked at earlier. The typical member is the so-called marsh marigold. It's not really marigold. Marigold's in the Asteraceae. It's one of these imprecisions of common names things. And it's called Caltha palustris. Palustris means of the marshes. And the flower parts are separate from each other. You can see 5 petals here. They're equal in size and shape. In other words, they're radially symmetric. Numerous? Well, there's only 5 petals. I'm not sure how many sepals there were. Probably 5, but not necessarily. And what is numerous, however, are the stamens. There are many of them packed into that center of the flower. And above them, or inside them, is numerous carpels, separate individual carpels on an Apocarpus gynoecium. And the flowers are hypogynous because they don't have a hypanthium. They're simply inserted with sepals and petals and stamens, each directly rising off of the flowering stalk. And this is a nice collection of features for the Ranunculaceae. Here's another member of the Ranunculaceae. It's called Pataca. It's got moved around to different genera. I don't think it's in the genus Pataca anymore. I think it's an anemone. And it has 5 petals and 5 sepals, but numerous stamens and numerous carpels that are separate from each other. Pretty typical member of the Ranunculaceae. Here's the flower of a buttercup in the genus Ranunculus. Buttercups, by the way, often have compound leaves. Many members of the Ranunculaceae have compound leaves. These flowers are kind of small, and at the moment, what are evident are the sepals. They're reflexed. There's 5 of them. The petals, they're sticking out to the sides. There's 5 of them. The stamens, there's a bunch of them there, too numerous to count. And most of the flower that we see, this part here that I just drew a triangle on, are many, many, many small carpels that are inserted individually, spirally arranged on the top of this dome-shaped receptacle. And this is called Ranunculus scleratus. Here's an example of one of the ways in which flowers are often modified. This flower doesn't have any sepals or petals at the moment when it's flowering. I believe it had sepals when it was in bud, but they fell off. The colorful, attractive part of the flower is just the stamens. So all those bushy stamens there that provide pollen also act as advertising to entice pollinators. And there in the center of the flower, not super obvious, are several separately inserted carpels. And the flower type in ovary position is hypogynous. This plant is Goldenseal. It's a lovely, rich woodlands wildflower, famous for having some purported medicinal value and thus being over-collected and removed and threatened and diminished in abundance in many places. So it's always fun to see Goldenseal, Hydrastis canadensis. Here's the whole plant of that one we saw earlier. I think these are out of order, but it's fine. What I want to point out is the leaves of members of the Buttercup family. They're often palmately compound. But another feature I'd like to draw your attention to is the absence of something. And what I'd like to draw your attention to is the absence of stipules. Stipules are little leaflet-like appendages at the base of the leaf stalk. And why am I pointing out something that this plant doesn't have? Big whoop. Because there's a closely related and very similar sometimes family called the rose family, which might have flowers that look an awful lot like buttercup flowers, i.e. 5 sepals, 5 petals, separate, equal in size, bunch of stamens, spirally arranged, bunch of carpels. But one of the 2 principal ways to separate those rose families from these buttercup families members that look similar are a vegetative one and a floral one. The vegetative one is the lack of stipules on the Ranunculaceae and stipules, as we'll see, on the Rosaceae. The floral feature, by the way, is that the flowers of the Ranunculaceae are strictly hypogynous, no trace of a hypanthium. Whereas in the Rosaceae, sometimes it's really small, but there is a hypanthium. Sometimes substantial, sometimes small, but the flowers are perigynous in the members that look like buttercups, and they're epigynous in some others. So you'll have a hypanthium in the rose family, but not in the buttercup family. Those are two features that can tell apart the roses and the buttercups. Here's a plant called Thimble Weed, and it shows the compound leaves, which is a common-ish feature in the buttercup family. It shows the 5-part radial symmetry of parts that are inserted separately, and maybe you can make it out there's a whole lot of stamens there, spirally inserted, and a whole lot of carpels. Thimbleweed is named for the thimble-shaped receptacle that has a cluster of achenes on it, looking sort of thimble-y. This is a plant called Virgin's Bower in fruit. I mention this because, well, these characteristics that we mentioned are ones that a lot of members have, and it's not necessary for a member of a plant family to have all of the features that are described for being generally found in the plant family. And an example of this is a woody member of the Ranunculaceae, and it has opposite leaves, which is kind of uncommon. It's called Virgin's Bower. It's clematis, and it's a lovely plant that you see in woodlands, and it's especially conspicuous in the fall when it's got these plumed fruits that look very like a virgin's bower. Like, yeah, that's the first thing I thought of. Why, that looks like, is that a virgin's bower? Oh, no, it's a plant. It's Clematis virginiana. What was I thinking? Boo hiss. One of the things that we like to draw your attention to is plants that are detrimental ecologically. And in the context of plant families, the important plant families, unsurprisingly, have some components that are not the best. And this is a plant that is called Lesser Celandine. At one time, it was in the genus Ranunculus ficaria. Now it's in the genus Ficaria verna. And yeah, it looks a little bit different than many buttercuppy things because it has kidney-shaped leaves, not compound leaves. Suggestive, by the way, of marsh marigold, which is a lovely native wildflower. And a lot of people confuse one for the other. And here we have these flowers with a lot of petals and a lot of stamens and a lot of carpels. That actually reproduces in part asexually by producing the tubers, these sort of swollen underground stems that can break apart and reestablish themselves. This is very, very, very well established in floodplains in somewhat disturbed areas, such as especially along the Olentangy River and other watercourses in central Ohio. Boo hiss, Lesser Celandine. So, to summarize, the buttercup family. Let's take a look at the little icon. The little icon that Roger Torrey Peterson drew. It's nice. You can see the 5 petals, and you can see the sepals below it, and in the center you see numerous somethings, in which case we know are stamens and carpels, inserted on a dome-shaped receptacle. Ranunculaceae, the buttercup family.